Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 9th of July of 2026. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. We will start with Crimea, more precisely with the Sea of Azov. During the previous 4 days, the Ukrainians, according to different sources, carried out 4 waves of attack, and as a result of these waves of attacks, the Russians lost up to 34 vessels of the Shadow Fleet, of so-called Shadow Fleet of the Russian Federation. These strikes started on the 6th of July of 2026, so almost 4 days ago. And during the first wave of attack, the Ukrainians just hit 2 vessels in the area of the Sea Azov, and these 2 vessels were trying to bring fuel on the territory of Crimea. The next day, the Ukrainians launched another wave of attack, and during the second wave of attack, the Ukrainians, according to different sources, managed to hit up to 8 tankers. The Ukrainians targeted them. As of the end of the 7th of July, it was very difficult to understand whether the Ukrainians managed to destroy or just they managed to hit these tankers. Very difficult. But the next day, the Ukrainians didn't stop attacks, and later we realized and we found out why exactly the Ukrainians decided to attack the Sea of Azov and decided to attack these fuel tanks. And this is the satellite picture that was published during the 8th of July of 2026, and here we can see dozens of oil tanks that were moving in the direction of Crimea. And yesterday we discussed that it was very important to understand whether the Ukrainians would continue these attacks during the 9th of July or not. And this morning we have already discussed the situation, and later we received the video published by pro-Ukrainian sources. And according to the video that was published during the 9th of July of 2026, the Ukrainians damaged additional 14 tanks in the area of the Sea of Azov. So summarizing everything according to different sources, since the beginning of the 6th of July of 2026, the Ukrainians damaged 34 oil tanks, fuel tanks in the area of the Sea of Azov. The Russians, according to information we have, were trying to bring fuel on the territory of Crimea. As you may know, currently there is a very big problems with fuels in the area of Crimea. There are blackouts through this territory, no fuel in this area, so that is why the Russians decided to use massive number of tanks with the purpose to bring fuel, as many as possible fuel at once in the area in the direction of Crimea, but most likely the Ukrainians managed to discover these plans of Russia and they attacked these tanks, and as a result of attacks, the Russians haven't managed to bring additional fuel on the territory of Crimea. So this is the situation, and now we understand what exactly the president of the Czech Republic was talking about when he was saying that Ukraine has only 2 months to end the war. After this, Russia will announce a general mobilization, according to the president of the Czech Republic. So, as you may know, the Russians are going to hold elections during September, October, or during the fall of 2026. Very important parliament elections, and obviously the Russians need these elections for the purpose to have possibilities and to have legal tools how to control and how to coordinate the current situation with Russia and the current situation with Ukraine. So that is why it is very important for the president of Russia, Putin, and for his party to receive a majority of seats in the Russian parliament. So that is why the Ukrainians and the Western countries believe that if they are able to ruin the election campaign of the president of Russia and the pro-president party, then they believe that other parties can take seats in the parliament of Russia, and other parties can probably change the situation and to end the conflict with Ukraine. So this is the thing. This is exactly what the Western countries are thinking about. So which means that during the next months, during July, of course, in August and the first parts of September, we'll see lots of updates, lots of strikes, and probably the biggest escalation ever since the beginning of the special military operation. The Ukrainians, with the help of the Western countries, will try to do everything they can with the purpose to force the president of Russia and his party to start negotiations, and most likely on the terms of Ukraine. But if But if the Russians are able to survive this period of time, if the Russians are able to stabilize the situation or just to survive the next 2 months, to hold elections, and if the president of Russia and his party are able to get majority of seats in the parliament of Russia, then according to the president of the Czech Republic, the Russians will announce not a partial mobilization that we saw during the 2022, but the Russians are going to announce a general mobilization. Very difficult to say what is this, a general mobilization. Either he is talking about just about 500,000 soldiers or he is talking about millions. Very difficult to say, but if this situation happens, this means that the situation is going to become very critical for Ukraine, because we see that now the Ukrainians went all in. All these strikes in Crimea, the blackout of Crimea, complete cuts of Crimea from the mainland, strikes deep inside of the Church of Russia, destruction of Russian oil facilities. This is something like an all-in situation from the Ukrainian side, which means that the Ukrainians most likely and the European countries don't have a plan B. And a plan B is the situation if Russians are able to survive during this period of time and to continue the special military operation after the fall elections. Now let's move further. The Russians are trying to stabilize the situation in Crimea, in the Black Sea, in the Azov Sea. So that is why during the previous 24 hours we received lots of videos from Odesa, Kherson and Nikolaev regions. The Russians were attacking facilities, parking sites, so everything that can have vehicles, everything that could be used by the Ukrainians to repair vehicles or to upgrade them. For example, during the previous 24 hours, this facility, it seems, was significantly damaged by Russians. The Russians right now don't know for sure probably where the Ukrainians are able to do this, so that is why the Russians attack everything that could be used by the Ukrainians this way. Another important territory is the settlement of Lymanets. Here we have more barracks and more facilities that were attacked by Russians, and this video was published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see lots of buildings, lots of constructions through the settlement were damaged and destroyed. The northern parts of the city of Kherson also, lots of strikes from the Russian side were recorded. The Russians continue using bombs to attack possible positions and possible temporary deployment points of the armed forces Ukraine, because the Russians understand if the Ukrainians attack Kherson region, if the Ukrainians attack Crimea, then most likely the Ukrainians use both either Odessa, Nikolaev or Kherson regions. Moving further, the settlement of Novorossiysk. Here we have more videos published from the Russian side, and you know that these days the Russian aviation activities have been intensified through the entire line of combat contact, not just in the area of Kherson. And you know that this situation, the current situation where the Russian logistics, where the Russian oil refineries forced the Russians to move their aviation even closer to the line of combat contact, just with the purpose to search for Ukrainian positions, air defense positions, and so on. And for example, yesterday, pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians lost a Su-35, and today the approximate position of the Russian Su-35 was recorded. So this is exactly the place where the Russian Su-35 fell when after he was ambushed with the Ukrainian 3 F-16s and 1 Patriot system. So as you can see, the Russians have to risk right now. They have to get very close to the line of combat contact, even sometimes very close, and as close as possible to the Ukrainian rear, with the purpose to use bombs to attack logistics, to attack hubs. And we see that Ukrainians are trying to use the situation with the purpose to ambush Russia's aircrafts. Now let's move further. The city of Zaporizhzhia and the city of Dnipro. During the previous 24 hours, another gas station was destroyed, and this video was published by local sources. And here we can see that the gas station was wiped out by Russians as a result of Iran strike. The Russians continue this situation. Almost every single day we receive more and more videos on this matter. In this video we can see another logistic hub that was wiped out by Russians. In this video videos. In these two episodes, we can see how Russians were attacking locomotives in the area of the cities of Lazova and by the name of Petykhatki. But despite the fact that the Russians, since the beginning of May, managed to have destroyed significant number of trucks, gas stations, and parking sites, we see that the Ukrainians continue attacking deep inside of the territory of Russia. There was a period of time when the Ukrainians probably 2 weeks when the Ukrainians haven't managed to achieve even a single result during the massive attacks, and starting from yesterday the Ukrainians began achieving results when attacking deep inside the territory of Russia. During the previous 12 hours the Ukrainians attacked at least in 3 directions: in the northern direction, and 2 waves were moving in the southern direction. As for the northern attack, the Ukrainians damaged and destroyed the Tver oil refinery, not the oil refinery but the Tver oil base, and these videos were published from this area. As of the end of the 9th of July of 2026, we still haven't received fresh satellite pictures where we might see the exact damage that Ukrainians managed to deal, because this black smoke could be just a black smoke of Ukraine's drone that fell in this area. But these satellite pictures will be published very soon. Furthermore, the Ukrainians attacked in the southern direction. One of these waves that was heading in the southern direction attacked the Russian vessels belonging to the Shadow Fleet in the Azov Sea, and the second wave of attack moved further in the southeastern direction, and the Ukrainians attacked the Stavropol oil refinery. We are talking about this territory. As of this video, probably the Ukrainians managed to hit this oil basin, probably to destroy it. So despite the fact that the Russians are trying to stabilize the situation, we see that the Ukrainians still have possibilities to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. The Ukrainians still have possibilities to attack facilities, energy infrastructure, and so on. So we see that the logistics and the fuel war intensify both from the Russian and from the Ukrainian side. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 12 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates. First, let's talk about the Sumy direction. As for the Sumy direction, we stopped receiving anything from this area. The Russians, I would like to remind you, during the previous days managed to improve their position significantly between the villages of Konstantinovka, Kondratyevka, Pisarevka, Khotin, Volozhanskaya, Kianitsa, Novosich. But these days we stopped receiving reports, and probably this situation happened due to the fact that Ukrainians redeployed significant number of forces in this area just with the purpose to stabilize the situation. So basically fresh forces were introduced by the Ukrainians along the line of combat contact, and this situation allowed the Ukrainians to win additional weeks or days. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kharkiv direction. As for the settlement of Kazachia Lopon, during the previous 48 hours, several pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Ukrainians conducted a counter-offensive operation, and as a result of this counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions through the northern parts of the settlement of Kazachia Lopon and to force the Russians to fall back. But as of the end of the 9th of July of 2026, we haven't received proofs on this matter, so that is why we are not going to change anything. We are going to wait for additional updates, because even the ministry, the group of forces north, also confirmed that the Russians continue advancing in this area. As for the northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region, it seems that the Ukrainians managed to introduce additional forces in this area, and now the Ukrainians are trying to secure and to reinforce the eastern Belaya Kolodez flank. We're talking about this territory. The Russians, according to the group of forces north, during the previous days managed to improve their positions significantly around the settlements of Yurchenkovo, Zemlyanoy Yar, and Belaya Kolodez, and today several neutral mappers and the group of forces north and several experts stated that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions through the eastern flank of the settlement of Belaya Kolodez, and currently the clashes are taking place through the village of Volokhovska. This is not a very big village, it's just a small village, but the Russians, as you can see, are trying to outflank the settlement of Belaya Kolodez from the east. If Ukrainians lose control over the village of Volokhovska, and if Ukrainians lose control over this dense network of the fortifications, most most likely the Russians would try to continue offensive operation further in the eastern direction towards the villages of Zakharovka, Ivanovka, Vasilievka. So basically, by taking this settlement under control, the Russians create the situation when the Ukrainians from these villages are being cut from the main logistics. So this is a possible scenario for this direction. And from these positions, the Russians may try to move further in the southern direction through tree lines and through fortifications in the direction of the villages of Bashkievka and Virivka, with the purpose to cut T2104 road and to encircle the settlement of Belaya Kolodez completely. As for the eastern direction, these days we start receiving lots of updates that the Ukrainians began bringing additional reinforcements and reserves in this area. During the previous 24 hours, lots of videos published on this matter. Here we can see lots of vehicles that the Ukrainians introduced in this direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation and not allow the Russians to break through the northeastern flank of the Kharkiv region. So that is why we see that the Ukrainians think and they try to win as much as possible time by holding the lines around the settlement of Belaya Kolodez and by reinforcing the northeastern flank of the Kharkiv region. The Kupiansk direction, during the previous 12 hours, lots of videos were published between the villages of Vasilievka, Grushevka and Staroverovka. As you can see, there are lots of videos how Russians were attacking vehicles of the armed forces of Ukraine that were moving in the direction of the settlement of Kupiansk, probably trying to bring additional reinforcements. So the Russians right now are focused to establish a kill zone or a gray zone or control zone over these territories with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to introduce additional reinforcements in the area of the city of Kupiansk. Several sources yesterday reported that the Russians intensified or accelerated their offensive operation in this region, which means that in coming days we may start receiving changes on the ground. Moving further, and let's talk about the Lyman direction. The sources, we expected that the Russians would announce complete control over the city of Lyman during the NATO summit or a few days after, but yet we haven't received anything on this matter. Furthermore, these days we start receiving reports that the Ukrainians are trying to intensify their counterattacks through the northern Lyman direction, and it seems that the Ukrainians are trying to carry out something like a special counteroffensive operation. The sources reported that lots of units are involved in this counteroffensive operation. More precisely, the 3rd Military Corps of the Armed Forces of Ukraine is involved in this counteroffensive operation, and now the Ukrainians are trying to force the Russians to stop their offensive operation through the city of Lyman or even to fall back. It seems that something big is happening right now from the Ukrainian side, and probably this is the reason why the Russians still haven't announced complete control over the city of Lyman. So in coming days, most likely we will start receiving additional updates about the situation in this area. The Slavyansk Konstantinovka direction, during the previous 12 hours, lots of videos were published from the area of the city of Nikolaevka. Pro-Russian sources published videos of how they were attacking additional reinforcements and reserves that the Ukrainians deployed in the area of Slavyansk power station and the city of Nikolaevka itself. So now we see the process when Ukrainians are trying to reinforce their positions with the purpose not to allow the Russians to take this settlement under complete control. Fresh forces were introduced in this area, and these fresh forces are tasked to stop the Russians. Furthermore, we received lots of videos through the eastern parts of the city of Kramatorsk. The Russians established complete FPV drone control over the eastern parts of the city. During the previous 24 hours, lots of videos were published how Russians were attacking gas stations through the city of Kramatorsk. In this video, we can see at least 2 gas stations were destroyed by Russians. One of these gas stations was destroyed through the eastern parts of the city, the second one through the northern part. Furthermore, as for the Slavyansk direction, the Russians also destroyed a gas station between the cities of Nikolaev and Slavyansk. And you know that when these videos were published, the first thing that came to my mind, how these gas stations have been operating for so long, probably since the 2022, just in 30 kilometers, in 40 and 20 kilometers from the line of combat contact. This is a very big question and issue for me to understand how these gas stations, why the Russians didn't attack them in the past and they decided to destroy them just now. Very interesting question, but probably we'll never get an answer to this question. The Druzhkivka direction, during the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. This is the end of the 8th of July and this is the end of the 9th of July. Today, several pro-Russian sources stated that the Russians, as a result of clashes, established complete control over the settlement of Nikolai, and this is basically the last village to the south of the settlement of Druzhkivka. We expect that in coming days, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information. Furthermore, the Russians reported today that the Russians repelled the counter-offensive operation that Ukrainians started right after the Russians announced complete control over the city of Konstantinovka. The NATO summit meeting ended, and today we start receiving first changes published by pro-Ukrainian sources. You know that the pro-Ukrainian sources for a very long period of time were trying to keep the city of Konstantinovka either at the territory in the gray zone or under complete Ukraine control, but when the NATO summit ended, the pro-Ukrainian sources also began adjusting the city of Konstantinovka very slowly, step by step, but in the Russian favor. As of this video, here we can see Russian troops moving through the city of Konstantinovka in different parts of the agglomeration. So as of the current situation, we have no doubts that the Russians control probably the entire city and maybe just several percent of the city on the outskirts in the area of the settlement of Alexeyevka-Druzhkivka are either in the gray zone or under complete Ukraine control. The Dobropilli direction, the Russians accelerate their offensive operation in the northwestern direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes were recorded to the south of the city. We're talking about these changes. This is the end of the 8th of July and this is the end of the 9th of July. Pro-Ukrainian sources published this video, and here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians through the southern parts of the settlement, and based on this video we came to the conclusion that the Russians managed to break through Ukraine's defense and to dig in deeper through the southern parts of the settlement. Furthermore, we see that the Russians are bombing positions of the armored forces of Ukraine further to the north, and this is not something like a regular FPV drone strike. This is something like an artillery preparation. The Russians use multiple launch rocket systems with the purpose to soften defenses of the armored forces of Ukraine through this area, and as you can see, all these attacks, these multiple launch rocket strikes were recorded to the north of the settlement of Shevchenka along the waves of possible reinforcements and reserves of the armored forces of Ukraine. So the Russians are trying not to allow the Ukrainians to introduce additional forces through the settlement of Shevchenka, which means that a decisive battle started for this territory. As for the settlement of Dobropilli itself, during the previous 24 hours, more videos were published how Russians were bombing the city, its central part. As for the eastern parts of the city, we still haven't received anything that can confirm that indeed the Russians managed to enter the eastern parts of the settlement. So as of now, we can't confirm. We have this infiltration area, but I would like to remind you that several days ago, before the NATO summit, several pro-Russian sources stated that Russians managed to break through Ukraine's defense through the eastern parts of Dobropilli and to dig in deeper. As of the end of the 9th of July, we still haven't received proofs about this. As for the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians accelerate their strikes with artillery and with aviation. During the previous 24 hours, lots of videos were published on this matter, but without changes on the ground. We have small changes from the area of the settlement of Novodanilovka. Ukrainian sources published a video of how Ukrainians were attacking Russians along NO8 road, and based on this video we have adjusted the map, but nothing special. But as we discussed, in coming days we are waiting additional updates, lots of additional updates, and the most important is that within the next 48 hours we expect another massive attack from the Russian side, as the United States of America warned Ukrainians a day ago. And that's it for today. The Military with Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, push your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.